Hi friends! Before I get started today, I just wanted to say that my heart hurts for Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color. I stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm committed to anti-racist ideas, policies, and teachings in my professional life and in my everyday life. Hi friends, my name is Matt Leslie. I'm a conservation biologist at Swarthmore College, and I study population biology and evolutionary patterns of wildlife species in order to better protect them. What I really do is use science to seek introductions. You see, science is our way of asking the natural world questions and then carefully listening for the answers. Unfortunately, we don't have a common language with all of the other species on planet Earth, so we have to use the scientific process, hypotheses, data collection, analysis, and then looking for patterns in order to converse with nature, to have those questions answered. Specifically, I look for introductions, so I can't communicate with one group of dolphins over here and ask them if they're part of the same population as another group of dolphins over there. So I have to use the scientific process to ask that question by collecting data and then looking for patterns. If it turns out that they're different, then we have a new population, we have a new introduction. Now, this line of questioning isn't new by any means. In fact, we as curious humans for centuries have been seeking introductions from the natural world. I study whales and dolphins, and the science of whales and dolphins has a long history of curiosity where humans would seek to understand whether this animal that died on this beach is the same species or the same type as the one that died on that beach last year. And that continued through our destructive whaling practices, where we would measure whales on whaling ships or at whaling stations. We would look at their skulls, we would compare skulls to try to seek this new information and try to understand whether we have something new, an introduction. Now, this process has continued through recent decades where we now use DNA to ask this question. DNA is a great tool because we don't have to kill the animal, we don't have to have an animal dead on the beach to be able to ask this type of question. We can use a modified crossbow system to collect a small bit of skin from the animal, a free-living wild animal, and then you bring that skin back to the lab, unpack the DNA, and compare DNA across many different individuals. But what if we had a tool where we could measure animals like we did before on the beach or on the shore, but we could measure live animals out in the wild, completely uninvasively? That's where my tiny desk adventure begins. In recent years, I've been using drones like Phineas here to measure whales in the wild without them knowing that I'm there at all. I fly over the whales, I snap a few photographs, and then I leave. I take those photographs back to the lab, and I can turn those photographs into accurate measurements of the whale. It sounds too simple, right? It's actually not that complicated. It's a method called photogrammetry. Photogrammetry needs a couple of different pieces of information to be successful. One is a high-quality digital image of the thing that you want to measure. Number two is the distance very accurately between the target, the thing you want to measure, and the thing that's doing the measuring. So in our sense, the camera that's on Phineas. Once you have those two things, it becomes a pretty simple geometry problem to figure out the size of your target, or in our instance, the size of the whale. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this geometry problem. Let me walk you through it. First of all, special thanks to my daughters for loaning me their easel and dry erase board. What we have set up here are two similar triangles, okay? Similar in the technical sense of geometry and trigonometry. That is, they have a shared angle. This angle is always going to be equal in both of these two triangles. Moreover, they have parallel edges here. Each one of these lines is going to be parallel. Okay, if those two facts are true, we have similar triangles. Now what does that mean, similar triangles? It means that the angles in each of these triangles are going to be the same. It also means, more importantly for us, that the lengths of these triangles are going to be proportional to one another. Okay? So that's what we have when we set up this system. And it's actually remarkably similar to what we have in the drone world here. So what we're going to have when we fly our drone above the whales is we're going to have our camera up here. We're going to have a distance to the surface of the water down here. This is where our whale will be. Okay, and we know some of the specs of our camera in order to be able to understand these dimensions within our triangle. Okay, so we have our sensor here. We know based on the manufacturing specifications what the sensor width is across the back of the camera. We also know what the focal length here is in terms of our lens. Okay, and what we actually want to solve for is this width here, or this length D across our whale, right? So we have S here, sensor width. We have F here, which is our focal length. And we have A, because we have a very accurate altimeter on our drone. We know the height of our focal length above the surface of the water, above the whale. So we have these two proportional triangles. So now that we have this set up, we can start our calculations, right? We know that we have similar triangles here. We have proportional lengths. We can now set up our equation. So once we take our image of our whale from above, we count up the number of pixels across there. We know the pixel width because of the manufacturer's specifications. We multiply those two together and get this length, S. Here, S is going to be proportional to D. We also know that A, our altitude, is going to be proportional to F, or our focal length. Here, we can then rearrange our equation to solve for D. Simple as that. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Now let me give you an example of this work in action. In the early 2000s, some colleagues discovered a new group of blue whales in Chile in the Pacific Ocean. And right away we started asking questions about whether or not this was a new population or whether this was an extension of a population from somewhere else in the southern hemisphere. So my colleagues and I went down to Chile in 2015 and 2017 and flew drones over the blue whales to collect measurements to compare to data that whalers had collected throughout the southern hemisphere. It was nerve-wracking work. It was exciting, it was beautiful there, but it was nerve-wracking work. The drone that we were flying was not Phineas. It was actually a custom-built drone that cost about $25,000 US, and it wasn't waterproof. So suffice it to say, everyone came back, including the drone, safe and sound. But I unfortunately can't share the results with you right now because we're in the process of getting that work published. However, I would urge you to stay connected with me via Twitter and or on my website, and those updates will be coming out soon. But why do we care? Why are we going through all this trouble to understand the patterns of the population differences? Well, my job as a conservation biologist is to identify these unique populations and then to give them individualized, population-specific conservation plans. Think of it as individualized medicine, but for populations. So we need to understand the needs of that population. We need to understand where it lives, how it migrates, how it gets food. But we also need to understand the threats to that population. Shipping lanes, fishing, oil and gas development, all the things that might impact that population. But even before we do that, before we can synthesize all that information into a conservation management plan, we have to identify the population. We have to do the science that allows us to meet the patient. We need that introduction. Thank you all for watching. I'm Matt Leslie, and this is Phineas, and that has been our Tiny Desk Adventure.